Hi, I'm Marion Owen, and welcome to our garden in Kodiak. It started as a clean slate, just flat soil. And because of composting, now you can see we've got gladiolas and vegetables and, well, let me tell you first. I never knew how to grow anything until I came to Kodiak. And when I did that in 1985, and I really wanted to grow something, even vegetables, I realized, well, Kodiak doesn't have a whole lot of soil. So I realized soon that I had to make compost. But literature said that it takes 5 to 6 years to make compost in Alaska. Well, I didn't have 5 or 6 years. So I did some research at the library. Remember, this is pre-internet, and found that composting can be made in as little as 4 to 6 weeks. When I was researching about composting in Kodiak, I learned that gardens don't have a perfect soil anywhere around the world. But if you want to improve your soil, the #1 way to do it is with compost. Turns out that compost is the all-purpose answer to your gardening problems. So I really wanted to learn how to do it. So what you want is soil that smells like, like the dirt you find in the woods, really sweet. And what you want is soil that is of good tilth or crumb, kind of like bread or cake, and is rich in nutrients and other things that plants need. So the idea is that you're not feeding plants per se, you're building good soil that in turn feeds your plants. So what you see here is all made from compost. And when I got here, like I said, I was told that it takes 5 to 6 years to make compost, when in fact you can do it in 4 to 6 weeks, even in Alaska. Welcome to my composting corner. We have a 3-bin system here, so that one pile is cooking or done, and one pile is nearly done, and the other one is where we could just put our kitchen scraps and so on, waiting to be composted. This middle bin is just about done. It started about this high, and now it's down to this level. And we have a thermometer in there, and it reads 120 degrees, which means it's time to turn it. Optimally, you want maybe temperatures like 145 to 160, and it is possible. And the way you do that is with a combination of fluffy things like straw or beach rye or leaves, and also with brown things. That's what brown things are. And then green things would be like manure, chicken manure, goat manure, kelp from the beach, fish bone meal, food scraps from the kitchen. So you're making a combination of carbon and nitrogen. And it's just like what we need is what plants need, and what the bacteria needs to break down your compost for you, and that's food, water, air. So a combination of these ingredients, brown and green ingredients, is what allows your bacteria and fungus to breathe, like with air pockets, and have moisture as they break it down, and the food. So this is how it works, and you just turn into a treasure hunter. So when I made my first compost pile in 1985, I had to scrounge around and go on a treasure hunt, and I actually cut down grass that was all brown for the winter. I found people that had chicken coops, and I went down to the beach and I collected kelp, and I had all of these ingredients all ready to go, and I made a compost pile. Now there are some things that you don't want to put in the compost pile, and that would be things like mayonnaise and salad dressing and oily things, or any deep fried foods, smelly foods like meat scraps like steaks or chicken. And if you live in an area where we've got active bears, then I would avoid putting fish scraps in your compost pile as well. Another thing you want to keep out of your compost pile are dairy products like milk or cheese or eggs. Now eggshells are okay. They'll break down and provide some really good minerals for your compost pile. So will kelp or seaweed from the beach. And that's really, really great to add to your compost pile. So when I talked about being a treasure hunter, one thing that's really great to do in the fall, which is the best time to gather your ingredients, is to rake up a lot of leaves. So what we do in the fall is we rake probably maybe 20 to 30 bags of leaves, and then we store them under our deck, and for us it's like money in the bank. Now ideally what you want is a minimum of 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And that gives enough mass to actually heat up in the center. And then once you make your compost pile and make sure it's a little damp but not too wet, you wait about 3 days or so and then you turn it. And then it'll start to break down and actually decrease. And then about every 3 or 4 days you turn it, or when the temperature starts to drop. So here's what the thermometer looks like, just like this. And so when it gets up to, and I can feel that it's warm right here, when the temperature gets up to 160 and then it'll start to drop, that's when you want to turn your compost pile. So it's very important to have some sort of device, whether it's a thermometer or your actual hand, to go into the compost pile and feel that it's warm. Oh, it's starting to cool down, then it's time to turn. And then if you want to prevent pests like flies or rats or mice, just know, just like us, that we don't like our house kind of disturbed. So if you're turning your compost pile, then mice and rats and so on, they don't like that kind of activity. So it pays to really pay attention to what your compost is doing. For example, if you're making a compost pile sort of like a little bit at a time, you're not really composting, you just got a rubbish pile. So again, you want to make it all at once, turn it until it's done, and the way that you know it's done is that it doesn't heat up anymore. It's just kind of cooling down, say 75, 60 degrees, 50, and so on. And then just let it sit. And then start another pile. Now what we do after the compost is done, we will actually run it through a sifter. And you don't really have to do this, but I like to have kind of a fine material when I start seedlings. So Now for winter composting, of course, it's a little different because things are very cold. So during the winter what we do is we set aside one of the bins as our kind of catch bin. So when we have kitchen scraps, then we put those in the holding bin or catch bin, and then on top of that we'll add some dried leaves. So we'll kind of do this layered effect during the winter, and while it's not really composting like hot composting, it is still breaking down, though slowly. So when spring comes around, then we take that kind of holding bin of materials and then we add it to an active compost pile. So there's really no reason that you need to put kitchen scraps into the landfill. You can just put them in a holding bin and then compost a little later in the spring. When you incorporate compost in your soil, it balances the pH for one thing, and that's really important because, for example, Kodiak soil has a very low pH. That is, the soil is really sour or acidic, which is great for blueberries and spruce trees, but not so good for broccoli and onions like you see here. Overall, you want to have your garden soil a pH of about 6.5. And compost, over time, will bring your soil up to that pH that plants really like. For example, here are these onions, and they like a little sweeter soil like 6.5 or 7, and that is perfect. So you don't have to add chemicals, you don't have to add lime to enhance your soil to get it to the point that you want to plant your crops in. Closing, just remember that composting is the magic elixir. It's the all-purpose solutions to your gardening problems. And one thing too is that while it might seem a little complicated, just simplify the whole process, and before you know it, you'll have the garden of your dreams.